So my name is Angelica. I'm with the Objective Standard Institute, and I'm here today with my distinguished guest, Dr. Bryan Caplan, who's a professor of economics at George Mason University, an adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute, and the author of 4 books plus at least 2 in progress, I think I've heard about.
10 in progress, actually.
10 in progress, there you have it. And most recently being Open Borders, the Science and Ethics of Immigration, which I highly recommend. Dr. Caplan, thank you so much for being here with me today.
It is a great pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So our topic for today is, of course, freedom and innovation. So I want to ask you about some specific topics, and then before I open it up to questions from other people, then I'll ask you for kind of a broad conclusion about freedom and innovation as such. But to start off, I mentioned you wrote a book about immigration in favor of open borders. So in the book, you mentioned that immigration, if we were to have more open borders and more immigration, that would greatly improve the economy in terms of GDP. But do you think that it has an effect on innovation, and is that part of what's driving that economic growth?
Yeah, absolutely. So here's the main thing to understand about innovation. It is very closely connected to population. The great economist Julian Simon, as well as Michael Kramer at MIT, have gone over human history, and here's the amazing thing. Almost all new ideas come from populous-connected areas of the world. So before in the pre-Columbian era, almost all new ideas came from Eurasia, which if you look at a map, are the large populous-connected areas of the world. After that, then we saw that idea creation started spreading over to other areas. And again, the main thing, first of all, is you've got supply. More people means more minds, which means more possibility for creativity. And then on top of that, of course, more people also means more customers. So we combine the greater supply of ideas from having a larger population with the greater demand with having a customer base. That is a key part of the recipe for innovation. Now, the key thing about immigration is that it rescues people from places that otherwise would have never contributed to what their mind is capable of doing because they're just outside of the main loop of the modern economy, and it brings them from the periphery into the center where they can actually go and contribute what they've got. At the same time, of course, when you're bringing in more immigrants around the world, you are increasing the wealth of consumers, which again is an additional benefit in terms of innovation. I often like to just talk about the old show Gilligan's Island, which it's not that great of a show, but it does have a great economic point, which is they've got an island with 7 people, one of whom is the professor, who's a brilliant mind, and yet with only 7 customers counting himself, if the professor comes up with a 1 penny per person idea that is not worth even a couple of minutes of his time, whereas if the professor were back on the mainland with 7.5 billion customers, on the other hand, a 1 penny per person idea is a $75 million idea, and so the benefits of that are enjoyed by everyone. And again, of course, the last key thing underlying this entire argument is that ideas have a very low marginal cost. Thomas Jefferson had this point where he said, when I light someone else's candle, mine does not go out. And this is a metaphor for ideas, so that in the same way that an ultra-popular YouTube video with billions of views, those additional views do not cost anything more, really, than if it were just a video that one person watched. And that is why there's so much to gain for humanity of moving innovators from places where they would be relatively unproductive or maybe just be farmers and to places where their ideas actually can blossom and then be enjoyed by everyone, including, of course, the people that don't even leave the home country because the ideas go from the center back to the periphery once they've been created.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So moving on to talking about other barriers in the economic realm to innovation. You were telling me that you're working on a book about housing deregulation and how,
Yes.
Particularly rules against building more than single-family homes cause a problem. How do you think that reducing those barriers, which is, I imagine, what you're arguing for in the book, could increase innovation in this area that a lot of people think is a major problem in terms of housing?
Right. So I think the main thing to understand about housing is that we have so many fantastic ideas for how to deliver high-quality, cheap housing that are basically illegal, right? Or all but illegal. Right now, I am a big enemy of hyperbole, so I do not like to say anything that is not literally true. But to say that it's almost impossible to build a skyscraper is literally true. There was about a 15-year period in San Francisco where 0 new skyscrapers were built. And now it was considered a golden age. They're building about 1 per year. And now maybe it's going to go back. There was a new referendum, so maybe it'll go back to 0 per year. So we have this technology for building tall buildings. We have the technology for building multifamily homes. I mean, it's not even really a big technology to go and put a lot of homes on a small amount of land, right? But it's very common to have, for example, 1 acre zoning, only one home per lot. So you put all that together, and there are fantastic opportunities that we don't even have to speculate about. They're known. They're just illegal, right? So when you're thinking about innovation, there's two kinds. There's the really exciting kind of innovation where it's like, no one knows what could happen. If we unleash these minds, they could discover great things. And that's great. But the old saying, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. We also have innovations that are proven, demonstrable, known, and still government will not allow them. So for construction, there's there, and then nuclear power is the other really big one, actually, where it's not like we need to speculate about what great energy sources we get. We've got something that is literally the bomb, nuclear power, and yet it is so hard to build nuclear power plants.
So both allowing people to try new things and also allowing people to do the things that we know already work.
Yeah. That's the place to start, obviously. That's one where you don't even have to speculate or say, who knows, maybe something great could happen. Like, no, we know something great will happen the day that you get your foot off the necks of the people that want to do it.
Absolutely. Okay, great, thank you. So moving on to some other economic areas, you've written a couple of interesting blog posts about protectionism and how there's sort of some competing effects there, the income effect and the substitution effect. So given that, what would you say is the effect of protectionism on innovation, if any? Maybe it cancels out.
Yeah, so the honest answer is I'm not totally sure, but what I will say is that I think that, on balance, it is very unlikely that protectionism is anything other than very bad for innovation. I mean, here's the thing. So, this was in response to a debate that I saw on free trade versus protection when I was teaching summer school in the UK. And historian of science Terence Keeley was saying something which is true, namely, look, if you keep out foreign producers from the country, this means there's a greater gain to the protected producers of figuring out how to improve. Right? That's true. But it also means that you are now counting upon these few people who happen to be your country to deliver the goods, when there's people all over the world that first of all are already better, and furthermore probably are going to continue to improve. So I said, the argument really does not make a great deal of sense. Really, again, the population argument, I'd say, from my mind, is what makes it extremely unlikely that anything other than free trade is the best thing for innovation, because when you cut your country off from the rest of the world, then you are counting on your country to come up with all the good ideas, and that is not a reasonable bet that the good ideas are going to primarily happen in your tiny country. Every now and then you get lucky. It is shocking how much great classical music came from a small area of the German-speaking world. But it's important to remember, that was not protectionism. That was a global competition to see that would deliver the classical music of humanity. And then this small area of the German-speaking world won. But it wasn't like there was someone that said, you guys are going to be protected and we're just going to pick whoever is the best German wins. That wasn't the system. It just turned out. Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms, and of course Mozart were these incredible geniuses and did play off of each other, but still, in the background is any country could have been the winner.
Okay, thank you so much. So moving a little bit away from economics, you mentioned on an interview a couple of years ago that as an economics professor at George Mason, you're pretty free to speak your mind. Your colleagues might not always agree with you, but you can do it.
Oh yeah.
Would you say that that's still the case today? And how much of a role do you think that free speech, particularly in universities, is important in innovation?
Right. So the main area of danger is hiring. All right. So this is the choke point. This is where universities have their hand in their throats. And if they prevent you from hiring the next generation of creative and outspoken people, then I'll still get to keep my job, and I'm going to be there till I drop dead. But in terms of finding new young people like me, that is the problem. So there are, so for the time being, hiring at my university still, there's a lot of suspicion and brainwashing sessions to try to not so gently nudge us into never hiring anyone like me again. But still, it can be done, right? Now, UC Berkeley a couple years ago, they actually did switch to a policy where for some departments, applications had to go to the Diversity Inclusion Committee first, and they were never shown to the departments unless the Diversity Inclusion Committee actually ranked you as a activist in favor of diversity inclusion. So it wasn't enough merely to write a hypocritical statement saying, yes, yes, I love diversity, love inclusion, it's all good. You have to actually demonstrate with deeds that I was an officer in an organization promoting diversity inclusion. And this is not merely social media scandal. I was curious enough to look at the official Berkeley webpage, and they admitted exactly what they did. So I am very concerned that the Berkeley model will become the standard model for universities, which would then mean that mine is the last generation of people that can disagree with the system and still be part of the university. So the other main area of that for now I say is an issue is just anything where you have a joke. Jokes or anything that might appear to be a joke is where people jump on you. I have never personally had any problem with any of the controversial things that I've said. I've never had a negative complaint about the content of my course put on a student evaluation. I know because they show professors the evaluations that are anonymous. And so I've been teaching now for 24 years. I've never had a student saying it's terrible, I was offended on a student evaluation. But I have had colleagues that have said something which was either a joke or misinterpreted as a joke, and then they were at least denounced by the university administration as being satanically evil. So, again, of course, you have tenure, that's not such a big deal, but on the other hand, if you don't have tenure yet and your university puts out a statement saying you are evil, that is at least something to be worried about. So I think the main issue ultimately is self-censorship, right? And if you have my personality, like I'm someone who will say, look, are they going to cut off my finger for saying this thing? No? All right, well, then I'm going to say it. Right? Look, I'm not claiming I'm a hero. If it was my finger or shut up, then I shut up. I'm not going to lose a finger over a statement. But, I actually even did a tweet saying, look, if I ever give an apology for saying something, for politely saying something that's true, know that there was some incredible coercion that was put on me, and it's insincere. So I just wanted to pre-commit to that in advance. But anyway, so there is, like a lot of it is self-censorship of people who really just don't want trouble, right? And honestly, this is one of the strange things, which is that I would say actually I get a lot less grief than people who are much more moderate than myself, because when you are much more moderate, you are actually part of a mainstream social circle, and their threat to say, well, we're so mad at you, we'll never talk to you again matters. Whereas, honestly, all of my friends, people that I care about, are people that I can talk to honestly. So I'm not worried that they're going to get mad at me, and if someone else gets mad at me, well, we're not really friends per se, so I'm not going to worry about that too much. I will say I am a big fan of Dale Carnegie's classic book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. So whenever I speak, whenever I write something, before I press publish, I always do ask myself, is there any more constructive way of saying this very thing? So, and I would not encourage anyone to deliberately antagonize anyone. Rather, make friends everywhere you go. Have a big smile on your face. Whenever people say, how can libertarian arguments be more persuasive? My answer is always, the arguments are probably really good. It's better than people are actually going to appreciate. What you need is to improve your attitude. Be super friendly to people. That matters so much more and will do so much more for our cause than just making the arguments better, which, in terms of arguments, I think we are doing very well. We can do better. I love arguments. I love arguments. I have this book on having kids. My colleague Tyler Cowan once says, it seems like you have more affection for your arguments than the children themselves. And I said, you're acting like there's a difference. An argument is a child. That's how I feel about my best arguments that I did today. I love this child. He's so good. I raised him from nothing, and now look at him.
Okay. Thank you. But on the subject of free speech and innovation and being willing to speak your mind and not censoring yourself, how do you think that leads to innovation, in particular in the universities and in the corporate world?
Well, so when people don't talk, then it is bad for innovation. When people are afraid, here's the main thing. Of course, there are many ideas that people are afraid to say they're stupid, and that's not really a loss. But the loss comes from the good ideas that people are afraid to say, and here's the really important thing. It's hard to know if an idea is good until you say it. Right? So it's the kind of thing where you just say, look, if I say 10 things, 9 are false, but I don't know which one is going to be true, and if we have a good conversation, we can probably filter out the 9 wrong ideas. But if I'm afraid to speak, then we will lose that 10th idea, which is good. And this is just one of the main issues with both regulation and offense. Right? So when someone tells a joke that many would consider offensive, right? Or even I say, yeah, it is. Like, I still try to give them the ultra benefit of the doubt because, look, it's not easy being funny. So anyone that tries to be funny is occasionally going to say something that sounds stupid or put their foot in their mouth. And if people freak out about that, then you're losing all of the good jokes that they are then nervous about saying. Because a lot of people don't know what's going to fly until you actually say it. Right, so like this goes with introducing yourself to people and trying to make new friends. Every now and then, you actually freak someone out by being nice to them. But is it a good attitude in life to say, "Oh my God, I need to really worry about freaking people out. I'm not going to try to make new friends," right? And keep trying. But on the other hand, when you do react negatively to someone, be thinking, well, maybe it made sense to them, and maybe do I want to be the kind of person that leads people to stop trying to make new friends because I didn't like quite how they did it?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely have to have a lot of trial and error in.
Yes. Trial and error. It's very important. And by the way, it's also worth pointing out a lot of great ideas come from what we call the neurodiverse. People that others will say they are autistic or have Asperger's. Some of my very best, most innovative friends, they have very poor social skills. And when people get mad at me, I shrug it off. When they get mad at my friends with poor social skills, say, hey, leave him alone. He's a genius. He meant well. And his being wrong is more fruitful than all of the truths that you're going to reach. So just back off. Right? So people know me, know who I have in mind here. That's Robin Hanson. I love him with all my heart. And when people get mad at him, I just say, how can you get mad at Robin? If you really knew him, you would love him. He's the sweetest person in the world. He just has trouble figuring out what will upset other people. But he means so well, and he has done so much. And if you treat him the way that he treats you, he will be your friend. He is not someone who has a double standard. So in a way, that's often my test of whether a person really is a jerk. Is that if you treat them the way they treat you, will they be angry? And not Robin.
Thank you for sharing that perspective. Yeah. So another related topic is education, which you've written on, and the case against education, provocative title, which can be beneficial, as we were talking about before. But in that book, you argued pretty convincingly, I think, that the schools, beyond the very basics, writing, reading, doing basic math, they teach a lot of things that aren't very useful. And so in doing that, we're not only wasting a lot of time and money, we're also wasting people's mental effort.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think you agree with me in saying that the modern education system, as it currently is not facilitating innovation.
Yeah, so overall, that's very true. If I were to go and try to find counterexamples, I would say that right now, at the top tech schools, they bring together very talented people, and then they talk to each other, and then that leads to amazing things. So if you look at Stanford Computer Science or MIT Computer Science, right? There, amazing things happen there. But even there, I will say, but pause, wait. What would be happening in a world where people just started working years earlier? And the answer is you would still be congregating that amazing talent. It would be in apprenticeship programs at Google instead of at Stanford CS. And you would then be filtering out a lot of the pseudo-innovation that happens in universities where people work on problems that are only of interest to other academics. Right? So it is striking to me how many brilliant and creative people go into academia and then are creative in a way that is of no concern to the rest of the world because they're just working on problems that only academics care about. Of course, academics love the rare counterexample where it seemed like it was totally impractical and would never have a real-world payoff, and then it did. But they don't like to talk about the vastly larger number of cases where it seemed like it would have no payoff in the real world, and it never did have a payoff in the real world. And that's actually much more common. So I'd say just in general, when people innovate in a way where they're trying to have a real-world impact, they have on average a better impact than when they innovate in a way where they are not trying to have a good real-world impact. And so much of the innovation happens in universities like that. But then again, a lot of what happens in universities is they just waste people's time and they make them go through mind-numbing, boring requirements. And then furthermore, this much more to the heart of my book, the education system does make our entire society very credentialist. To the point where if there's someone who seems good but they don't have a degree, so if that person's really so good, they would have a degree. So I'm not even going to worry about it. Right now, I think if you think about it for very long, you'll realize there are a lot of very good people without credentials, and there's also, of course, a lot of bad people with credentials because the system doesn't work that well. But nevertheless, if the share of really good people without credentials gets low enough, then it is selfishly profitable for employers just to say, well, I'm not going to bother trying to find those people. And that is something where a system that was less credentialist, where there's more focus upon apprenticeship and just working at an earlier age, then I think we'd be better at finding the people that right now we miss, the people that I call the diamonds in the rough, people who are very good in practical terms but simply do not like school because they don't want to conform, and I don't blame them, right? So I conformed as little as possible to get a PhD. That is, of course, still an enormous amount of conformity that was expected of me, but I was always there asking, do I really have to, or can I weasel my way out of this stupid thing? And there are a lot of ways to weasel out. So if you are a nonconformist and you hate the system, I am happy to give you some advice about how to reduce the pain as much as practically possible without having the really happy answer of you can just avoid it, because you probably can't.
Right, so it seems like we're limiting innovation by limiting what people can say when they're in the university, by limiting what they're studying, and then by not looking at people who maybe don't like school but are still really practical.
Right. It is also worth pointing out that the academic disciplines where free speech is the worst are the ones that have the least practical offer the world anyway. Right, so STEM, I would say that censorship within STEM is quite low. There's only a few areas, like if you work on human genetics, and you might have to worry. But other than that, I think you're pretty safe. The areas where the orthodoxy is mind-numbing is social sciences and humanities. And these are areas where, in terms of at least immediate practical ideas, not much happens. In terms of good policy ideas, I think that is the academic social science is where good policy ideas come from. However, it's also where almost all the bad ideas come from. So, and the more general point is that most ideas in social science just go nowhere because it's too hard to demagogue, right? So people who run government are demagogues, obviously, and so they're only interested in ideas that come out of academia if they're easily demagoguable. Right, and then if an idea is just too sophisticated for good or ill, it just tends to stay in academia. Out of all my work, I feel like my book on having more kids has done the most good because I've actually persuaded hundreds of people to have more kids. Whereas my other books are more like, well, they'd be really good if people listen, but not enough people listen to actually achieve the good. So I can sit around hoping, but I'm not that hopeful.
Yeah, I mean, it's always easier to throw slogans at people than it is to make an argument, right? But, so talk to me more about your book about having more kids then. What is the main benefit of having more kids?
Right, so the heart of this book is actually one of those few areas of STEM that is hard to talk about, which is human genetics. So people have debated the question of nature versus nurture for millennia. Right, so why is it that kids resemble their parents? And of course, there's nature and there's nurture. What's interesting is about 60 years ago, scientists actually figured out a way to answer the questions, finally. And the methodology comes from studying both adoptees and twins. All right. So with adoptees, it's pretty clear. So if you adopt a kid, he's not your blood. So if any resemblance that he has between adoptee and child will be due to nurture. And then you could go and say, and then how does that compare to the similarity between a biological child and parent? Anyway, long story short, big punchline out of all this research is that, especially in the long run, almost all similarity between parent and child in the first world is due to nature, not nurture, which means that the very popular helicopter style of parenting, where parents really ruin their lives in order to give their kids a decent future, is just based upon scientific error. It is not true that you need to ruin your life in order to give your kids a good future. Your kids are going to turn out about the same way either way. And the first useful practical implication is that there's stuff that you're doing for your kid's future that you don't like and they don't like, stop, because it doesn't have the benefit that you think. But then the second thing is, once you have adjusted your parenting to get in line with the science, then consider, well, maybe it would make sense to have more kids than I was having because it's a much better experience. So around the time my book came out, there was a op-ed piece on what I call soccer as contraception. And it was by a mom saying, well, we have 2 kids right now. They're both in soccer practice. This absorbs our entire lives. We're constantly chauffeuring our kids to and from soccer practice. Our life's really hard. Then we talked about having a 3rd kid, and we liked the idea, except then we said, oh my God, there'll be a 3rd set of soccer practices. We can't do that. And I'm just reversing this reasoning and saying it is not true. You have to send your kid to soccer for your kid to have a good life. Almost all the things that parents are doing, especially middle class, upper class parents are doing, it's just based upon a misconception. By the way, it is not true that parenting does not matter at the level of what country you actually grow up in, which is another key open borders point. So it really is true that being adopted from the third world and growing up in Sweden leads to massive gains in height, weight, skull circumference, IQ, educational performance. So a truly dramatic night and day change in your upbringing does actually matter, just as intuition would say. But the difference between growing up in one home fit for adoption and another home fit for adoption, that's where you really don't see the results. And again, from this, I say that this has these critical implications for optimal family size. And it was very gratifying. I have actually heard from well over 100 people saying, I changed their minds, and there's another kid in the world because I wrote that book. So
that's a great way to feel like you're having an impact on the world. People are making drastic life changes because of your book.
Yeah, my words give life.
Literally, yeah. I think we have time for just one more question from me before our broad concluding questions. So, on the subject of innovation and education, I completely agree with you with the problems with the current education system. There are some people who are trying to innovate in education, Montessori schools and a number of other related efforts like that. Have you seen any of them be useful? Do you have a strong opinion? Do you think that will help with innovation in the long run?
I'm ambivalent about that. So here's the thing. Of course, people that work in this area predict great things. But in terms of being able to show that they've accomplished great things, it's all just a blank check. Now, the main thing that I know is that there's been a lot of work on trying to raise, for example, IQ. And people have tried really hard, and it turns out to be super hard, and especially hard to do it in the long run. It's easy to get scores up for a while, but then the problem is they go back down. And also, most of that seems to be teaching the test, where you get the scores up on the test you're prepping them for, but you give them a different IQ test and they haven't improved, which suggests that it was really not a true gain in intelligence, but rather a change in the knowledge of that specific test. And then, for creativity is much less worse studied, is much worse studied. But again, I would just say that when people fail on something that is easily measured, we should be skeptical they're going to succeed in something that is poorly measured. So, again, I wish them luck, and I will say that when I wrote the case against education, I did underestimate private education in one very important way, right? Because I did say, if you just take a look at private versus public education, the curricula is very similar. Even the brainwashing is quite similar. The big difference is that private schools almost all stayed open during COVID, or reopened much more quickly. Private schools actually cared about customer satisfaction and at least delivered the daycare that parents are really looking for, and public schools in many parts of the country just said, hey, we're going to take all your tax money and we're not even going to give you daycare. Never mind teaching your kids how to read or write or do math. We're not even going to go and take your kids off your hands so you can do your jobs. So I do think that I underestimated private education in the case against education, and COVID really opened my eyes to this vitally important service that private schools did perform that public schools largely dropped the ball on. In terms of whether private education is actually going to deliver the goods and for innovation, it's much less clear. And again, as a social scientist, it's very important to always remember, you can't just go and look at kids that go to one kind of school versus another, see that the kids who went to the private school are more creative, and then say the school caused the creativity, right? There has been a lot of work done on, for example, what is the benefit of going to an elite private school? And if you do it naively, where you just say, hey, Harvard graduates do tons of great stuff, therefore Harvard causes tons of great stuff, like, well, hold on there. Were not the Harvard kids special before they went to Harvard? And yes, when people go and do those adjustments, normally they find at least most of the apparent gain to going to elite schools is actually illusory. So I would just say that it's important to keep that in mind. This does not mean that it's not possible to go and figure out ways to make people more creative. If I had to take a guess, a totally speculative guess, again, I would say that truly embracing tracking at a very high level and saying, like, not only are we not ashamed to bring high-achieving kids together and give them a different curriculum, but also saying, hey, we're not ashamed to bring high-creativity kids together. And we're going to do that, and we're going to see what happens to them. And say, look, we're not going to worry about diversity and inclusion. We're going to worry about creativity and achievement. And if we get diversity and inclusion, great. And if we don't, then look, this is not a system of social engineering. This is one where we're trying to figure out how to go and get the job done. So that is my best guess about how to get as much creativity. Although, actually, really my best guess, which I would say is not even a guess, something I'm ultra confident in, is open borders. So rescue all of the human talent that currently is going to waste. There really are a lot of geniuses growing up in farming villages in Taiwan, or not in China and India, not Taiwan, but China and India right now, who quite possibly will never be noticed in their home countries and will be the smartest person in their village, but other than that, the world will never hear about them and never enjoy the fruits of their intellect and creativity. And with open borders, we are much more likely to find those people and move them to the heartland of idea creation, to the benefit of both the would-be innovators, but also, of course, humanity.
Absolutely, amen to that. Well, I think it's time for the big question, and then I'll see if anybody out here has any
great.
questions they want to ask you. So the topic of this interview was freedom and innovation. What's the connection?
Right. Well, let's see. I guess my inclination would just be to go and look at history and see where does innovation actually come from. So I said, like, a very big predictor of innovation is just population and connectedness. So when you see large populations connected to other parts of the world, that is the recipe for where almost all innovation comes from. So that's step one. But still, if you go and look further, you'll see that there are often very large populations where they don't do very much in terms of creativity. And I say yes, so those tend to be the very oppressive societies, right? So Maoist China had an enormous population, but almost no innovation except in the realm of horrors, right? So yeah, they got nuclear weapons, they got hydrogen bombs. So in North Korea, of course, they put all their energy into death, and almost all, right? Almost all their intellects go into death, and they get some results out of that. But in terms of actual innovation for the betterment of mankind, basically nothing came out of Maoist China. Of course, nothing comes out of North Korea. And so, yeah, if you do look, then you will see that that the freer areas of the world are critical. And then, actually, if you're looking specifically, you'll also see that often we have highly innovative minorities. One of the most impressive graphs I've ever seen is in Charles Murray's book, Human Accomplishment. And this just looks at the number of accomplishments of Jews over time. What you'll see is that before the emancipation of Jews, back when they were basically locked in ghettos and were heavily discriminated against by their governments, there was almost no human achievement, there was almost no scientific, technological, literary, cultural, philosophical achievement by Jews. And then, right after emancipation, it goes to about 25% of European achievement. So it is a huge jump. So just the openness and being willing to say, hey, there's some people that are different, that are unusual, that are not really part of our in-group, and yet just to go and give them the basic human decency is enough to go and sometimes reveal, wow, they have something incredible that we didn't see before because of the crushing power of government beforehand, right? But, also worth pointing out that there are plenty of other groups that had low achievement before emancipation and low after. So it's not simply that every group will have high achievement afterwards, but you don't know until you do it. But it also means that you don't need to go like very basic respect for life and property, standard libertarian rights. That's what Jews got from emancipation, right? And that turned out to be plenty, right? So very important to keep that in mind as well and to appreciate that while people may say, oh, what is that? Like, yeah, it's actually a lot, and it's enough that people that are inclined and can work with it can and have done wonders with it.
So, freedom encourages innovation.
Oh, yeah.
With the caveat that we also need population and connectedness.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Gilligan's Island, they had freedom, but actually they did have a lot of innovation because the professor was so amazing, but that's fiction. So, 7 other people would have accomplished next to nothing, or really they would have struggled not to regress. Just to keep the technology that they arrived on the island with in a state of repair would have been beyond the capabilities of almost any group of 7 people. So, yeah, population matters a lot. It's true.
Great. Thank you so much. Does anybody out here have questions? Gentlemen in the back.
Yeah, so I don't want to strawman you on your thoughts on Thesis as an economic calculation problem.
All right.
From what I understand, your argument was it's not necessarily true because you had places like the Soviet Union and they didn't instantly collapse. So his argument can't be entirely true. Is that a good characterization?
Yes. Yes. So I've written a couple of papers on Ludwig von Mises' economic calculation arguments where I've expressed a lot of skepticism about it. And what I say specifically is he's right that it is a factor, but first of all, he has no good argument for it being the factor, which is the way that he presents it and so many of his fans present it. And furthermore, when we do go and actually look at the empirical evidence, he's wrong. Right? So in particular, Mises had this argument saying that the whole problem with the fundamental problem of socialism, and he says the reason why it is impossible. He did use this odd word, impossible, right? And he not casually. He said it many times, and his English was great, so it's not some kind of linguistic error on his part. Is that since you need prices in order to figure out what is the cheapest way to do anything, and since socialism does not have prices, socialist economies will not be able to figure out the cheapest way of doing things, and therefore they will not be able to sustain a modern economy. And I say the argument is great until the last step, right? So I say it is at least theoretically questionable. Maybe it'll just make them 10% poorer. Now, the real thing that I say, though, that I think is like the critical thing is when you look at the actual reason why the main socialist economies had terrible famines. It had nothing to do with loss of price calculation. It had to do with old-fashioned terrible incentives where the government says we will take all your food for free, and that's the system. So when you look at the horrible famines that happened in the Soviet Union and China, it's a very simple story where the government just said, hand over all your food or we'll kill you. And also, give us your land or we'll kill you. And then they got famines. But important to remember, this is very primitive agriculture. They're not doing accounting. This is traditional agriculture, which was, however, sufficient to keep their countries fed until the communists came along and seized their land and took their stuff. Furthermore, the other point that I make is that we can actually see that there were some times when socialist countries did go and use Western prices, which Mises pointed out. We can also see, however, that they usually didn't. Usually they refused to use Western prices because guess what? If the Soviet Union or Maoist China used Western prices to decide what to do, it would tell them not to do what they're doing, and then they would have to go and stop. Right? The Western prices would have said, don't build the world's biggest truck factory in the middle of Kazakhstan. It's a stupid idea. Right? And yet, because so much of those economies was based upon prestige and demagoguery, and just the philosophy of gigantism, to say, is biggest truck factory in the world, we are the greatest country in the world, this kind of nonsense. The fact that the prices told them not to do it, they just said, bah! Right, so that was more the reaction. So, but was there some more specific question?
Yeah, so that was just kind of like clarifying.
Yeah.
So my question was, can't we just look at it in a way of like, so what Mises is looking at is like the absolute abolishing of private property or abolishing of money, which technically the USSR didn't do, although it came very close. So, you had a few times where they kind of went towards abolishing money, but then they realized, okay, that doesn't work very well. And they were very poor in productive efficiency, like many economists like Alec Nove and Gator, and Barbara Weissel, lots of economists have pointed this out. There's a lot of empirical evidence showing how bad they were in productivity. But then
I know that.
And then you look at like the very small private sectors they had, mostly in like agriculture, right? So like 3% of all agricultural land was like privately run.
Yeah, all true, but I say that fits the standard 19th century argument of socialism gives bad incentives for production. It does not fit the idea that price cost accounting is the key to success. So now there is this other argument you're alluding to, which is, in a way, actually, Mises does, in fact, wind up saying the same thing that so many socialists say, which is the Soviet Union was not real socialism. Why not? Because they retained a small private sector. And in fact, if you read Mises closely, it comes down to, we don't have true socialism unless the entire world is socialist. Now, if you think about it a bit more, it's like, well, suppose there's a small black market, not even a legal market, but legal private agriculture. Suppose there's any black market at all, then Mises would have to say, okay, then, yeah. Even then, even in a world Soviet economy, where they have actually abolished all legal private property, as long as there's any black market at all, then technically that's still not socialism. Now I'll say, all right, if that's your argument, then you can just say, all right, fine, no empirics are relevant. But here's the thing: if that's your argument, it's not an argument against any actual socialist system, because any even half reasonable person will say, yeah, well, we're never going to get rid of every black market transaction on Earth. So therefore, Mises' argument then becomes relevant. So for Mises' argument to matter, you've got to say that there's some kind of a continuous dose-response function, and as you move in the socialist direction, it gets worse and worse, and when you get to the Soviet level, then it's disastrous. And that is where I will say, if you're willing to go down that route, then we can look at the data and we can say that's while Mises was correct to say that the Soviet Union would be a total and horrible disaster of mass death. But he was wrong in saying why that would be so. And I say, if you really look at the most horrible things that happened there, it comes down to this very simple argument of put a gun to farmer's head and say, give me all your food or die. And then you come back next year and you find out, hey, they're not growing food anymore because of what you did to them, or they're growing just enough to eat and then hiding whatever they got. So that's really what I say about it. And then like I said, like the other point of the socialist economies using Western prices, that is true to a small extent, but what we really saw generally was that they were willfully refusing to use Western prices because if they had done it, they would have told them to stop, and they didn't want to stop.
Thank you for that. Craig, did you have a question?
Yeah. Going back to the points you made about the universities and their refusal now to hire good people like you, Dr. Williams, and real economists, I'm wondering what you would say in terms of economic forecasting about what kind of opportunities this is creating in the marketplace. If the universities are going to continue to go south, what do you see as the greatest opportunities out there for people who want to take advantage or shorten the colleges?
Great question, yeah. So what opportunities is academic discrimination creating for people that do not like what is going on there? I wish I could give you a more hopeful answer, but here's the thing. University endowments have increased enormously over the last few years. They have done great during COVID, and so, which means they were the top ones were already financially independent for eternity. It's important to understand how rich the top schools are. They could charge no tuition, double salaries of all employees, and just run down and then just put their endowment into treasuries, and I think that would be sufficient for them to do what they're doing for eternity. Right, so that is the bad news in terms of the financial prospects. Again, if these were for-profits, you might say, well, even so, they're going to eventually have a hostile takeover. Universities are not set up to ever have hostile takeovers, no matter what they are doing. So they are hardcore nonprofits. It's not even clear legally how you would begin to try to say that Harvard is misappropriating the endowment of Harvard.
My question, I think I didn't answer my question very clearly because I wasn't thinking about shorting literally for financial gain over this thing. But what opportunities, because students are going to start to realize, the better students are going to start to realize, hey, I don't want to go there. What are the opportunities that open up to serve those students or those kinds of people?
Right. Well, I'm going to have even less up there. Okay. So yeah, so my book, The Case Against Education, my story at least is the overwhelming reason why people want to get degrees is for the signal. The amount of what they are teaching you is not very important, especially outside of STEM. And so the main thing that students are going is for the stamp on their forehead saying grade A worker, and people that are good students, even those that are very disgruntled with the system, it is generally highly imprudent for them to say, screw this, I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to go and work my way in the world. The labor market is set up to be highly credentialist. And again, I think this makes economic sense given the system that we have, because out of people that are lacking college degrees in today's society, there are a few John Galt types who just say, I refuse to participate in this terrible system, even though I'm great. There are a lot more people who are just difficult to work with and not good employees. And for employers, it's generally not worth the time to go and sort those people out. In terms of niches of opportunity, so intellectually, I'd say think tanks and the internet and Patreon and YouTube and Twitch and all these things are ways where people can make a living while being a dissident thinker, and that is a great possibility for some people, right? I would be nervous about advising my kids to do it because, maybe, but it seems like a real superstar market where most people are not going to be able to be successful in it, but there's room for some. And of course, do not forget think tanks. Think tanks are much more ideologically balanced, and it is quite striking that, especially in fields like history, where the political leanings are so left wing, you can find that I think a majority of history PhDs working with ideas work for think tanks, not universities, because the academic discrimination is so much less. By the way, so I am generally of the view that markets are great at eliminating discrimination. But this is all because of the for-profit incentive to hire people that are undervalued but are just as productive. But in the nonprofit sector, on the other hand, their goal is to lose money, right? So you're much more likely to see severe discrimination in the nonprofit sector than the for-profit sector. And if they've got a big endowment, they will do it forever. or at least until they come to their senses. And for top schools in America coming to their senses, gee, don't hold your breath.
So come take classes at Objective Standard Institute is what I'm hearing here.
So learn there, but get credentialed elsewhere, right? And also, I would say, like if you want your kids to get a genuinely good education, I would not pull them out of the existing system. I'd prepare them to face the existing system. So, you can just go and totally retreat from society, but your kids are probably going to live in the world, so it's better for them to understand the mainstream view better than mainstream people understand it themselves. And so I can't tell you how many times I just explained the normal view of the world to my kids. Say, look, this is what normal people think. Like, well, I don't hear many people saying it. Yeah, well, because they're my friends. But here's what normal people actually think. I'm a public opinion specialist. I know a lot about what normal people think. There are a lot of views that will almost never be voiced in academia, or never be voiced in our circles, and yet 70% of Americans believe them. Like, well, where are they? They're not around us, but they're out there. Trust me, the data say so.
All right, thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions for Dr. Caplan?
All right, this has been extremely fun. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good luck.
Okay.